Looks like it's streaming now, so I'll wait a couple minutes.
Hi, everybody. I hope you are having a wonderful week as best we can in a time like this. It's my pleasure to bring us back to a really important conversation we started off a couple weeks ago, having to do a deep dive into the CARES Act with and the SBA Disaster Relief Loan with Krystal Darby, David Jones, and Jeff Hawthorne joining us again today. Hi, everybody. How are you? Excellent.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey. So I think we kind of want to maybe reintroduce yourselves a little bit and the topic before we dive into some questions having to do around, how startups and business owners and people sort of take advantage of some of these relief packages that are coming our way. Krystal, would you like to kind of kick us off?
Happy to start. For those of you who don't know, I'm Krystal Darby. I'm a senior business advisor at the UTSA Small Business Development Center. And we'll get into, we really want you to ask questions. We're not necessarily experts on all of this, but we'll answer as best we can and we'll tell you when we don't know. So I'll pass it on.
Jeff, you want to go?
Sure, Jeff Hawthorne. Pleasure to be here with you today. I've been in the financial services industry going on 25 years now. This is my third crisis, and there's no such thing as a playbook that goes along with each of these. So it'll be my pleasure to help contribute to the conversation and answer any questions that I can. I appreciate you. Go ahead, David.
Sure, I'm David Jones. I'm an attorney. My practice primarily represents startups and technology companies, helping them with formations, business strategies, investment fundraising, and brand protection through things like trademarks and copyrights. And I think we had decided we were going to start off today by just saying from our three worlds, Krystal's at the SBA, Jeff's in banking, and mine in law, what are the things that we are seeing most often? Sort of what's a lawyer's perspective on what's been going on? And I think that we'll start by saying something hopeful. Which is that after the first couple of weeks of this crisis, when everybody, me included, were just all sort of knocked on our ass trying to figure out what is happening and where is it going and is the world going to end, the fates of different businesses varies a lot from industry to industry. People in food service are still really struggling. People in banking are, asked to be volunteered to work extra hours because to help process all of the loan applications that are coming through the banks. And people in different industries are also trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I take this time to either pivot, or how do I take this time to really look inward and look outward at my business and figure out what are the things we do well and what are the things that we do poorly, and or what are the things that we should be trying to pivot towards when whatever normal is going to look like in a few months when that becomes a reality. You know, I know from my perspective, I've had a ton of calls from people and emails from people asking about taking advantage of programs like the EILD and the PPP. And increasingly, there is not so much about the EILD or the EIDL, but about the PPP. There's a lot of skepticism and cynicism about how that program has been administered. You know, we've all heard stories of you know, Ruth's Chris and the Shake Shack and other, you know, companies that don't look like small businesses obtaining these loans. I will tell you that the one that to me is like the most glaring example of all that. I don't know if anybody out there knew that the Los Angeles Lakers, a $4 billion franchise, qualified for a multi-million-dollar PPP loan. I mean, they ultimately gave that money back when, you know, called out for it. But, you know, even with all of the, you know, the inadequate funding and the cynicism and the easy things that to pick at, the programs have been hugely beneficial for a lot of people. You know, I'll tell you that I got a PPP loan, and, you know, I look at it as a tremendous source of comfort over the next few months that I'm going to be able to keep my staff. You know, I can see far enough out into the future that, you know, it's been a huge comfort. And what we're hoping to do is, like I said, we encourage people to ask lots of questions because we didn't come with long prepared talks. And so with that, I'll pass it back to either Krystal or Jeff and swat the cat that's under my table making a whole bunch of noise.
I'll give you a quick rundown on where the programs start. As far as we know, the EIDL application is still closed. And so that's an issue. Oh, how cute. So the EIDL application is still closed. There's no way to access that at this point. They decided to process all of the applications that were already in the queue before we ran out of funds until they know for sure how much they've got. A lot of folks are going to take those EIDL, the actual loan part, even if they've gotten an advance, or they may not take it. And so the SBA doesn't really know right now how much they've got left. And so until they processed all those, they're not going to take any more. The PPP reopened. Guesses are that it was going to be 48 to 72 hours before all the funds were gone. It now looks like it's going to be a little bit longer. And the best advice I can give you is, number one, open up a separate account to drop those funds into, pay out of that account, or do a transfer to your operating expense account with a notation to show exactly what those funds were going to be used for. And then the other advice is that if you have not applied yet, go find yourself a small or medium-sized community lender. That'll probably give you a better chance of getting into the system. If you don't have an SBA number that your financial institution has given you, you do not have the PPP yet, and it's not funded yet. But a lot of those are starting to come out now because they're processing, and Jeff can probably speak to more on that. So I'll hand it off to you, Jeff.
Krystal, thank you. Great updates. As we know, round one ran out of money on the 16th, Thursday. Congress quickly acted and appropriated additional funds. $310 billion for round two was signed, and that was Friday, the 24th. So this Monday, round two was ready to go. The stark difference between round one and two were the fact that during round one, all banks and lenders were still scrambling to actually build their systems and processes. and clients as well, applicants were still trying to interpret and figure out what documentation they needed. And a mad dash of applications came pouring in. The difference in round two was that all the applications that were submitted in round one that did not receive funding were still in line. And so there wasn't a lot of scrambling. It was just a matter of processing the existing volume of applications for round two. And as we saw on Monday, the SBA's system crashed, a system that banks use to submit the applications, or it's called E-Trans, for electronic transmission. And the E-Trans system crashed, almost like a distributed denial of service. It was basically just too much volume. It couldn't handle it. So Monday was not a very productive day. A few got in, but banks can load like 5,000 applications at a time into the system. I don't know the exact amount, but smaller banks doing onesies and twosies were getting theirs in, where large banks were throwing a large file into E-Trans, and it was all crashing. Yesterday, was a much more productive day, at least from my perspective, in seeing that the SBA's E-Trans system did not crash, and a lot of funding numbers were produced. So the good news is today is another productive day. And Krystal makes some very good points in terms of where you may be in line at your bank. It wasn't your choice when this crisis occurred as to where you were banking and where your operating accounts existed. And so some of the advice we were given was to be careful to not do more harm than good. It could be a disservice to tell someone, hey, go apply. Now that you've already applied at your bank, leave that in line and go apply somewhere else. May or may not be the best advice, because who knows where you are in line. And even some of the larger banks, the big three, if you will, took, hundreds of thousands of applications. I think one of them quoted having 370,000 applications. And so they have large headcounts and large processing teams that they can cycle through those applications. But it may not be the best advice to take yourself out of line and then go start over at this point. You may want to just contact your bank, whoever your contact may be, and say, look, I know you may not be able to tell me where I am exactly in line, but at least give me an idea how many applications your bank has, where you are, how many you've processed, because leadership should be able to tell the folks on the ground kind of the pulse check as to how many applications and what volume's going through. But beyond that, we're in a situation that there is, as I mentioned before, there is no playbook. I think these second round of applications, smaller loans and smaller businesses are actually getting access to funds in the second round at a greater pace and a greater rate than the first round. That's good news. I'm seeing the loan applications and the dollar sizes smaller in round two. And I'm hoping that because of that, it spreads it around and lasts a little bit longer. But the fact that there were millions of applications already in line and already processed, if you will, by the institutions ready to submit to the SBA means that if you're not in line already, chances are reduced drastically. So hopefully everyone on this broadcast has their application in and is in line and gets some sort of idea from their banker where they are in that process. The other thing I'll mention before I turn it over is be very careful and diligent in your application, in completing the application. I've seen so many simple mistakes, and you have to have every I dotted, every T crossed. If you don't answer every single question and certify every line where the initials go and answer them correctly, it can get kicked out and declined, and you get to start all over. You get basically kicked to the back of the line, and that's very unfortunate. I've seen some applicants on their fourth try, and they're just hastily, carelessly trying to quickly get that application in, and they're making mistakes, and these are unfortunate. So be very careful. Have somebody proofread it. Make sure you didn't miss a single question, a single initial. Everything must be answered on that two-page application before you submit it, because that caused problems. And beyond that, I'd like to maybe say, Krystal and David, should we start taking some questions and make this a productive conversation today with whomever's on the call?
I think that's a great idea.
Do we have any questions?
Well, while we're waiting for that, I can add one other thing, which is if you do have an application in and you're not sure what the status is, you know, as Jeff said earlier, you will know you are approved when there is an official SBA number assigned to your transaction, and from there, again, it's going to vary by bank, but it's taking, you know, a week to 10 days between the approval and the actual closing and funding of the loans. That's been my own experience, and that's what I have heard. So, you know, it's not going to put money, it's unlikely to put money in the bank immediately, but at least once you have an approval, you'll know that, you know, the money is going to be coming.
That's a really good distinction to make. I know that when we had our planning call, we kind of brought up, you know, some people think that because their bank has processed their application and it's moved into the next phase, that might guarantee them funds, but you're telling them to make sure that they wait till they have that number from the SBA to know for sure.
Right. Well, because they assign a transaction number as they you know, agree that you have claimed a slice of the pool of assets that they use internally to actually do to do the disbursements. And then that's when your bank and your banker will know for sure that you've been, you know, approved fully, finally, formally.
Awesome. Thank you. So we do have our first question from Steve. He says, as a sole proprietor who has Schedule C line 31 net income for the 2019 basis, how does one actually get a chance to get their loan forgiven if they have no employees?
Well, that's the question of the day for sure. So I will just jump in and say that the forgiveness guidelines that have been published thus far are available to you at the Treasury's website in a nice, concise PDF. And if you're a sole proprietor, an independent contractor, self-employed, any of the methods of payment, but if you're a single person paying yourself, you still can document that the income is going to yourself. And so Krystal can help me here, but you got to spend 75%, according to the guidelines, 75% of this loan must go to payroll costs. You're paying yourself. And so it's a lot simpler, in fact, Steve, for you to document one employee, which is yourself. And so long as you can do that, that 75% of the funds have gone over 8 weeks since you receive your funding. 8 weeks is the measuring period. You can pay yourself over the 8 weeks. And so 75% of that loan amount, if it goes to payroll, then when we go to processing forgiveness, for which we have not seen what the forgiveness application is going to look like or the final rules on forgiveness, it's just what's published thus far. And at the end of the day, you can't lay yourself off. You're not going to reduce your hours. In fact, if you've been fortunate enough to get a loan, then you got it made in a sense that you only have one employee to document, and that's yourself. Krystal, what are your thoughts?
So just a quick correction that it's 75% or more has to go for payroll. That other 25% or so can go for rent, for utilities. There, Steve, there's a little question if you're home-based, whether you can take those percentages that you would normally take for business use of the home. But at least if you pay at least 75% of the full amount to yourself, then you should be in good shape for the forgiveness. Just to add on to that, if for some reason some of it is not forgiven, it rolls into a 2-year loan at 1%. And the first payment on that is not due until the 6th month. So you're still in pretty good shape, even if not all of it is forgiven, but they will forgive as long as you're at 75% or more for payroll. that
then
helps.
Steve, right, and Steve, I'll add as somebody who owns, I own a PLLC, so that's the professional version of a limited liability company. And this is a question I have too, and I'm not 100% sure I know the answer to whether my pay, which is not paid I'm not a W-2 employee, whether that money can be treated as payroll for those purposes. I'm sure hoping it can be, but I don't think that anybody knows 100% for sure whether there's some special packaging of that pay that might need to be done to give you a better chance of forgiveness. I'm still frankly figuring that out for myself and talking to my accountant about it.
Awesome.
I would say Krystal made this point the other day when we were chatting just offline, and you can actually basically put aside and segregate those funds, use them over the 8-week period. Whatever is ultimately eligible for forgiveness, you will be granted that through the documentation you provide. And then whatever funds are still left over, there's no prepayment penalty. So you have a choice to make, right? You can take that loan that Krystal mentioned, the 2-year 1%, or you could pay it back. And so a lot of folks will have a lot of choices to make at the end of this 8-week period, for sure. I want to say that I'm also going to tell everyone that the SBA provided an update yesterday in a form of an interim final rule that's helpful. It's a 10-page Q&A on how to disperse the funds, a little more clarity on the 8-week process, and I would highly encourage you to read that off of the Treasury's website. It's looking like it's going to contain some excellent insight for you.
Thank you. We had another question come in from Writing Panda who asked, who can I get to proofread my application? Does someone with a particular specialization need to review it before I submit, or is that something that, a friend of yours or someone, you trust like an advisor can just take a look at?
Krystal?
Well, Jeff, that was your advice, so.
Well, listen, here's my thoughts on it. I noticed leading up to this program that the front runners of applicants all had advisors. They had, and let's just call it what it is, they had access to attorneys and CPAs and banking relationships that they may have forged over the years. And so that's a luxury not everyone does have. But as a small business and a small business owner, it's important to establish those types of relationships that could be pro bono in nature. It could be a friend, it could be a community member, it could be somebody like ourselves. But at the end of the day, it was the CPAs and the attorneys that I saw that were giving quick and sometimes not so accurate advice prior to the program launching on April 2nd. The rules changed the day before the program went live on April 3rd. But at the end of the day, if a family member, a friend, a business partner, a community member can help you proofread that application, it's pretty plain language. It's mostly yes or no's and mostly data driven with information such as your name and tax ID number, phone number, email address, and such. However, if you've got a banker, I've always wanted to help people, and I've always looked at regular normal course of business loan applications and said, hey, you missed something on that loan application, let's go over it and review it together. So your banker would be a really important person to lean on, because if you just submit it through a portal, you don't have a banker per se, then you're guessing that you got it right until you find out you didn't. You get kicked to the back of the line. So prior to submitting, if you haven't already, then I would highly recommend leaning on someone in the community or some friend of yours that could review it. But it's just a 2-page application. It's not terribly difficult. What I'm talking about is I noticed a lot of people just were in such a hurry and they were freaking out basically. And you can't blame them. They're like, I got to get in before the money runs out.
Right.
And they were just carelessly missing some pieces.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I've heard anecdotally from bankers that one of the things that caused the initial flood of these forms coming in was to get kicked back was before people even got to the substance. There was a couple places where you had to check a box and initial something, or you had to certify 6 different things, and people were just missing one of them. simple sort of typo things that anybody could help you with. The substantive part of it, in terms of what documents need to be attached and in what form, the guidance has gotten quite good about what exactly is required to be attached. And each bank, I think, has some different additional things that they look for on top of the things that the two-page application specifically requests. But they have become very clear about that too. Because I think in the beginning, one of the things that everybody on both the banking and on the applying side was struggling with is that exactly what the form looked like changed multiple times in the week leading up to this opening. The banks were getting still evolving pieces of information that they were having to rapidly share with all of their personnel about what information needed to be attached, what needed to be included, how did you do blah, blah, blah. How do I do this if I didn't have employees on the payroll for the last 12 months? There were a lot of things that were just very unclear in the beginning that have become clear as the program is settled.
Just to add to that, you can get a second pair of eyes with an SBDC advisor. And I highly recommend that you've got one that you can kind of talk to. I'm happy to take new clients as well. And I think having somebody that can kind of lead you through some of those questions, you can talk to us on the phone or through a Zoom call, share your screen. I walked one of my clients through the EIDL application, the first round, step by step, simply because she had some confusion on how to do that. So I'm happy to do that for my clients, and all the advisors at the SBDC can at least provide you some. As David said, it's not, we're not experts on what those banks are asking for, but we've seen most of these forms. Every financial institution has been a little bit different on all, as David said, on the extra documentation that they want. Some of them have a real heavy, real deep lift to get all of your taxes in, everything, and some are a little more flexible. But I think obviously anytime you're going for a loan of any kind through a financial institution, Jeff's right. If you've got somebody at that financial institution that you can talk to, you're going to be in better shape. It's just that right now, I think everybody's stretched so thin that it would be hard to get a lender on the phone to guide you through that. But please take advantage of the services that are out here.
One of the lessons we're going to learn through this, one of many lessons we'll learn through this, is how important relationships are, how important advisors are to you, whether that's a friend or whether it's your banking relationship. We're going to see a lot of folks, because just as many wins that we celebrate, meaning for accomplishing getting someone a PPP loan, there's a line full of angry people, frustrated folks still waiting to get their PPP loans. And so banks are going to have winners and losers. Some clients are going to walk away saying, I dislike that bank, I'll never do business with them again. And others are going to celebrate that bank and say they did me, they saved my business. They did me a huge favor and got me through. One other point, and I love writing Panda. That's a great handle. So who doesn't like pandas? But at the end of the day, the great question there was, do I really need somebody with a certain specialization? The answer is no. And one other interesting piece, what you need is somebody who specializes in details, really. I mean, somebody who can make sure, hey, I didn't miss a single line on this application. I'm looking at the application now, but here's what's interesting. It doesn't even require that the actual owner of the business, it doesn't even have to be the one filling out the application. There was a feature within the CARES Act that allowed for agents to act on behalf of a business and receive compensation from the banks for this, because each deal, and I don't want to get into the details, but each deal that a bank processes, the SBA is paying them a percentage fee based on the dollar size of the loan. And out of that percentage fee that the SBA is paying, which, by the way, these are all taxpayer dollars. So part of that appropriation from Congress, a portion was set aside to handle just the fees that are compensating the banks for processing these deals. But out of the fee that the bank receives, if there is an agent involved, then there are specific guidelines on how the agent gets paid from that bank through that fee. So agents can act on behalf of clients and submit the application as well. Agents can be anybody. It can be an attorney, it can be a CPA, it can be anyone. But by definition, excuse me, however, I just thought that was an interesting take when I first read it, going, oh boy, I can't wait to see how many agents come out saying, I want my money, and when they're going to get it, because I haven't seen a single agent ask for their compensation yet.
Well, I see there's a new question that kind of is sort of right in your sweet spot, Krystal, which is from a David. I read that UTSA opened up a COVID business assistance center. Who can help there, and what exactly do they do?
Really good question. So the what we're referring to is a business recovery accelerator. It's not really an accelerator by traditional means or traditional definition. But what it is a kind of general place for you to go if you've got questions, you need quick answers. And also if you need additional advising, they'll help to connect you with an advisor. The SBA gave our institute at UTSA 1.2 million to set up this. Basically right now it's a call center, but it will provide other services down the road. And the address is txsbdc.org/business recovery. There is a ton of information on there for the SBA loan processes. There's a ton on there for employers. There's even a link to Texas Workforce Commission's information on unemployment benefits and the pandemic unemployment assistance, PUA, that's being offered. There's just tons and tons of information on that website. And then you can also apply if you need additional assistance or more long-term assistance. And I thank you for the question, because it gives me a chance to talk about that. The phone number's on that website as well. I don't have it handy, but that website will get it for you or get you to the right people. So hope that helps.
Yeah. Well, I know, by the way, I'll just throw in one thing that, I've been getting a lot of questions about the last sort of 48 hours, which is, if I obtain a PPP loan and I bring some people back, but what if the business is not there and I need to lay them off again? What's the impact on them? And I know, they can obviously reapply for unemployment, but it's unclear whether someone, and this may be as a practical matter, I don't mean this as a legal matter, whether someone who is on unemployment, who is getting the $600 a week sweetener that the Fed's provided for in the CARES Act, can that person reapply and obtain that? I don't really know the answer. I mean, I think nobody, that factual scenario, to my knowledge, hasn't played out yet. And then there's a whole new layer of questions about the interplay between the PPP and unemployment benefits now that the state is gradually opening. And because I saw that yesterday, the Texas Workforce Commission said that if your business reopens and you choose not to go back because of concerns about the virus, they're going to treat you as having quit. And so you will lose your unemployment. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they would know that one person just either, decided actively not to go back versus, we brought back 7 people out of 10 and you were not one of the 3 that came back. But that's a statement that's throwing a whole nother layer of uncertainty into the mix about how business owners should play the question of whether you're doing the right thing by your people by bringing it back now.
Isn't one of the great ironies of this program, David, that the intent was to save jobs and get folks back on the payroll and or continuing to be on the payroll? Yet this is a historic event that, like I said earlier, there's no playbook for, because it's a virus. There's a health concern, an overriding public health issue where confidence is not there amongst our citizens to step out into the world like they used to in a safe manner. We don't know that you could be going back to work and being exposed, and particularly you could suffer some health consequences for that. And so it's so strange. I definitely know that unemployment, when you're on it, you have to be actively looking for a job, or you could get booted off because you have to answer those questions. How many resumes are you, or how many applications are you filling out? How many interviews have you had? So aside from that, interesting point is, if a restaurant, for instance, opens up at 25% capacity and you got one party in every corner of the restaurant, who's going to be working those tables, and are they going to make enough tips? Are they going to make enough to actually to pay the bills? Until we're well above 50% occupancy on large gatherings are allowed and we're safe. It's just going to be an interesting dynamic. To your point, you used interplay. It's the same thinking is, yeah, the intent of the program it's well intended, but there are some obvious barriers and obstacles to just logic, this reality of who's going to be ready to go out there and mix and mingle amongst the public without a strong level of confidence that you're not going to get sick.
Just to add another layer of complication, prior to all of the closures and everything, there's also the expanded family and medical leave under the Families First Coronavision Response Act. Information on that website that I mentioned earlier on that act. And so there's paid sick leave guaranteed expected for employers who have less than 5 or fewer than 500 employees. They didn't expand it to the folks that have more than 500. But there's some requirements on paid sick leave underneath that act, and I'm not really sure how that interacts with all of the forced closures. So the best thing to do is to consult somebody who's more of an expert on that, and that would probably be through our HR group at the SBA, and you can access that information through that same address.
I'm hearing some large employers actually start complaining about the 8-week constraints, having to spend this money over 8 weeks when we weren't even open. Because remember, April 3rd, we're going on 4 weeks ago when this program started. Friday will have been 4 weeks. I'm looking at the calendar, and you know what? Those that got funded really early have had that money for 2 weeks easily, but we have not been free from our quarantined recommendations. And so the public is largely hunkered down. Businesses still aren't bringing back employees. So I wonder how many employers chose to either retain those funds to decide to either pay them back later, or paid their employees to stay at home, or compared and said, hey, from a compassion perspective, it's better for you to go get that $600 weekly bump that was afforded through unemployment, because it's going to be more than what I'm going to pay. It's an interesting thing that we're under an 8-week must spend parameters, where maybe one of the many fatal flaws of this act that are just now being discovered, maybe they should have expanded that criteria so that really we were reopening in phases, the 25%, 50% occupancy, and in phases, then employees could start coming back to work with a little more confidence, knowing, because we're going to know soon enough, folks, in the next 30 to 45 days, as we phase in these reopens across states, we're going to know if it flares back up. Really, in June, we're going to have a good feel for how this virus acts if we open too soon, because support it or oppose it, we're going to find out regardless, because it's happening, these reopenings. But I just think within the parameters of 8 weeks, it just seems in hindsight that that's too soon. We were still closed in quarantine. Maybe they should have gone with the expanded number of weeks instead of 8 weeks. Don't you guys think?
I think it's up to anybody's guess at this point. So, Who knows? Who knows? I'd like to ask a question to anybody who's watching. If you have one of the businesses that is allowed to reopen, however constricted that may be, do you plan on reopening? I've talked to a couple of my clients.
Great question.
One who's a retail place who's decided just to do curbside, even though she probably could bring people in. One restaurant that's decided, no, we're going to continue to do to go. Because from what I understand, opening up to only 25% of your patrons at any given time really isn't enough to pay the bills. So I'm just wondering if anybody could give me some feedback on whether you plan, if you're in one of those businesses where you're affected and could reopen to some level, do you plan to, or do you plan on continuing to do what you've been doing right now or staying closed? How do you plan on handling that? Don't all jump to that answer at once.
Well, and Krystal, I'll kind of chat to you for a second, which is that I've had several conversations over the last 2 or 3 days with clients who would love to reopen, but they're really kind of scared to reopen. And to their everlasting question or credit, they're very concerned about their team and both the health risk and the financial consequences to their team members if they come back and it turns out that the business is not there, even whether it's 25% or whatever percentage you might think about, and they've ended up financially hurting, even if there's no medical consequences, they've ended up financially hurting the people that work with them, and they're really concerned about that. I would guess that there's going to be a decent amount of paralysis among business owners about what the right thing to do is, because they're concerned about, both like what revenue is going to come in the door, and also, what are the collateral impacts I'm creating on the team that works with me.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
You could accelerate the failure of a business by making them, well, not making them, but if somebody miscalculated and opened with 25% capacity, their expenses are going to outrun their income and revenue for sure. I think most business owners, Krystal, to your point, are wise to that and realize the numbers will do the decision making for them. But I just find it so, I guess it's ironic, but it's just no good deed goes unpunished. No matter what move is being made here, whether financially and economically or whether public health concern factored in, it's almost as if every decision has its risks and every move will have its risks. I'm reading that someone who has a restaurant and is basically answering your question, they're definitely staying closed until the end of the month or end of May. Excuse me. I forget we're still in April.
I think we're going to see more and more of that, especially restaurants that don't quite feel ready to open for dine-in, especially the ones that have been doing okay. I mean, certainly not to the level they've done before, but I've got one restaurant client who has been doing a pretty good business on to go and curbside and delivery, and so been able to keep most of his staff employed and working, but certainly would love to get back to normal dine-in patrons, but just doesn't feel comfortable doing it, even though he's able to with 25% of the patrons.
I mean, I know I've gone through Whataburger's drive-through many times during this time. I haven't gotten sick to my knowledge, but I go to Las Palapas or Whataburger, two of my favorite places, mainly to hang out with friends and family and go enjoy some together time. If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and I'm either going to make it myself, go to HEB and get it, or I'm going to go through the drive-through or take out. But the concept of dining inside of a restaurant for me was probably driven mostly by a community feel of I want to get together with friends and family
Sure.
as much as I'm hungry. So that fear of rushing out to see, hey, are we going to build some herd immunity here, and who wants to go first? That fear is going to be an overriding factor for many, as many are hesitant to go back out into the community. And I think businesses are smart, and they'll make their own decision. I'm just glad we have the choice, so to speak, that you can open or you can stay closed. But we'll find out soon enough if this thing rears its ugly head again in the next 30 to 45 days through these phased reopenings. What other questions do we got?
Well, I'll add one other thing on the food service businesses. I mean, I think that, there's obviously a variance from place to place, but a lot of what I've been hearing is that many landlords of restaurants are being pretty understanding about the fact that the business went from wherever to zero in the space of a couple of weeks, and that pressing for full collection of rent is the most surefire way to have those businesses close permanently, and perhaps make a decision to file for bankruptcy, and that is for at least some restaurants. I know that is making it easier to try to take the smartest sort of public health decision about when and how they reopen.
And that's a good point. As a landlord, I would rather have a less percentage of something than 100% of nothing. And
Right.
If I had a loyal tenant prior and they were healthy cash flow wise, otherwise they were healthy and they were loyal, it's hard to find. I'm just speaking from experience. It's hard to find a good tenant, regardless whether it's residential or commercial. And so you kind of want to treat those with kid gloves during this time and know this is a relationship, hopefully long term. You look at the layers of wealth, and typically landlords are rich people, right? A lot more wealth. Some maybe not so much liquidity sometimes, but let's be honest, these landlords, they typically have more wealth, and then the tenant typically has a little less wealth. And so as you look at it from that perspective, you have to make accommodations. You have to be able to defer, in some cases, payments that are going to come back, not be such a cold-hearted person. But it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic for sure between the landlord and the tenant these days.
If the property owner happens to have an SBA loan, a 504 or a 7A SBA loan on that property, then they can ask for deferred payments, but they also can get 6 months that will be paid for by the SBA. And that's helped a number of them. Of course, an awful lot of landlords and property owners don't have SBA loans. If they do have a loan, it's commercial. But I'd urge them to talk to their bank about getting some kind of deferred payment structure worked out. Just be really careful to read the small print. And because if they can get some kind of delay on their payments, then maybe it'll make it easier for them to delay their tenants' payments as well.
If there is a good time to have a crisis, and I'm being serious here about this point I'm going to make, it's during an election year, because I don't have the answer to whether these PPP second round of fundings run out in 48, 96, 72, 96 hours. But if they are oversubscribed and they're exhausted, say in this week or by today or tomorrow, there'll be a tremendous amount of pressure on the Congress to reappropriate additional funds. There's also discussion in the Congress about what are the next stimulus packages going to look like. So and the next big one that's likely to come out is the Main Street lending program. But just hold out hope, everyone, that if you don't get your PPP loan in the first or second round, hold out hope that maybe there will be some additional programs coming down the pipe. But I don't have the answer. I'm holding out hope myself.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
Well, if I can say one other thing to people that has nothing to do with the subject of the talk or about law, but I know I've spent time, talking with a lot of people who are friends or clients about, having days where they just get the blahs, and I've had those too, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's just nothing wrong with that. We're all living through a circumstance that we couldn't possibly have envisioned. And, everybody is missing being around people probably more than they ever imagined that they would. And it's just been people who are doing the best are the people who are making it a point to take time to do things for themselves. Whether that's, walk a dog, whether that's listen to a record, whether that's work in the garden, but just, something that kind of takes your mind off of the awfulness that is the news. And so I'll just encourage everybody to do that.
And occasionally just scream.
Yeah, that's good too.
It works.
We do have one more question. Any thoughts on the travel tourism industry? Oh, Ronald, I wish I had some advice. I'm going to let the other two guys figure this one out. Any advice?
Well, it's not that we have the answer, but it's the obvious. If you take a look at just air travel, not even going into hotel or hospitality at the moment, but just 96% reduction year over year. That's just unfathomable how many planes are still grounded. And so when we see the hotel occupancies down similar numbers, 70, 80% down, the only people going to hotels and traveling are for really essential business services or funerals. Nobody's saying, hey, I'm going to make that trip to NOLA this weekend like I might have, in the past. So travel and tourism is being driven by several factors. One is the rationale of individuals who don't want to go out and hurry up and see if they're immune to this virus, but also being driven by municipalities, state, local governments, the federal government in terms of guidance to say stay at home and help the world, help the local and state and region recover from this. And so once it does bounce back, however, once we get these phased reopenings, as we know in the state of Texas, the governor has said Mondays are my day, and on Mondays he's going to reassess and reevaluate. So he announced this Monday on April 27th that Friday, May 1st, all of the relaxations and phase one reopenings, we've read that. And on May 18th, that's another Monday, that's going to be phase two on additional relaxing. So that's when I want to kind of go back and see just how deep this contraction of various industries that include travel and tourism, how deep it goes and what second quarter earnings look like, not just the small business owner, but if corporate earnings and the contraction of GDP hit as hard as the forecasters say, second quarter is going to be the worst recession that anyone has ever lived through in our time frame. So what do you think about travel tourism before you look at this question there? Did I say anything that wasn't already on everyone's mind? Probably. I don't have the answer.
Well, the answer is, I think the answer on travel and tourism is the same as a lot of businesses, where you're going to be putting yourself in a position where you're in contact with other people. The idea of getting on an airplane, I don't know. Those never, no offense to the airlines, but those never struck me as the cleanest places to begin with. And, it's going to take a while before I'm ready to say, let me hop on a plane and take a trip somewhere. I see there's a question here from Alberto. Is a 13-year-old liable? Yeah, I know. Is a 13-year-old liable if he throws an alley-oop pass too high and causes his aging father to throw his back out? We can DM me.
I did see something really, really kind of hopeful for an Airbnb owner. I've got a client whose mother-in-law is, in some of the high-risk groups because of her health and her age, and they were able to find an Airbnb on their street and put their mother into the Airbnb so that she was down the street from them so that they could deliver groceries and come help and spend some time outside the window to talk and be a little bit closer than having to drive all over town, to get to her house. So there's some creative ways to continue that income. And I really had never even thought about that. I don't know. I have no idea how you market that. But if you know your neighbors, then maybe, or the neighbors around that place where you're doing the Airbnb, maybe you go and, pass out a flyer to let them know that you've got space available if they've got family members they'd like to get closer, and a little disposable income to pay for the rental. So
that's a win-win, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I think we've got to be just a little more creative in how we're thinking about things. I know a lot of businesses are doing more and more online sales than they ever did before, kind of transitioning. We've got a workshop coming up this Friday on going as digital as you can. I'm happy to send that link after. I don't have it handy, but I'll get it to Matthew and Joyce and they can send it out. So.
And I would close in saying that it's pushing May 1st. What are we at? I always have to look at a calendar because Friday. I don't know what day it is. So, truth be told, in 30 days, the typical summer vacation season begins. Kids are out of school, families like to go to the beach, they like to travel, whether they take road trips or airfare. We're about to find out, as these phased reopenings occur state by state, whether or not June turns into a flare-up, or if we have indeed turned the corner and that this virus continues to slow in terms of spread of infection. We'll find out 30, 45 days from now, and we'll see about travel and tourism and hospitality, restaurants, hotels, you go down the list, other businesses. I mean, there's too many across too many industries to name, but although it seems like forever, 30 to 45 days will come soon enough, and we'll have our answer, at least in terms of confidence publicly, whether or not we feel safe going out.
Steve, you're absolutely right. I see your comment on the page that constraints have a tendency to come out with creativity, that when we know that certain paths are blocked for us, we're a whole lot more likely to find another path. So maybe that's the hopeful thing we can take from all of this.
Right.
Well, it looks like we're almost at about time. So thanks to the three of y'all for great second part of this. One thing that I'm interested to see that we may do a follow-up to this or potentially some other workshops is what this relief and going forward potentially will look like with reopening happening. And what that will look like over the next couple months. But before we close out completely, is there any kind of closing remarks or things for those tuned in you want to close with?
Let me just say contact information, Krystal, CRYSTAL.Darby, DARBY at UTSA.edu, or get in touch with your advisor if I'm not your advisor. And then that website that I think is already in the comments, Matt, right? The txsbdc.org, and there's a ton of information that can be helpful to you, and plus links to Department of Treasury and the SBA and all the other resources that we've got right now. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
And I just put my email up in the chat, which you can save if you want, because there's a button in the lower right hand corner that allows you to save a chat. So if you want to do that, feel free. Happy to try to be as helpful as I can.
I echo the comments. Love one another. Be helpful. We're all in this together. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks again so much for being willing to do this again.
Thanks, Matt.
that concludes today's workshop. Tomorrow we have another one on collaboration led by Alberto from InZync. So you can head to our website or our Facebook page for more information on that. But we'll continue to do this as Geekdom is still at the moment currently closed for in-person space and events. So stay on the lookout for more online workshops throughout the next couple of weeks. But thanks again for tuning in today. We'll see y'all.
Okay.
See you.